So welcome. Please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen and introduce yourself. Tell us about the organization that you represent, where you're coming from today, and I hesitate to say this, but how warm is it where you are and wherever you are in the U.S.? My name is Christian Beckwith. I'm the Executive Director of SHIP. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Jackson, Wyoming, that's dedicated to the advancement of nature as a social determinant of health. With our Health and Nature webinar series, we're exploring the health and nature movement from the perspective of our various stakeholder groups. And today's episode marks the start of our land management chapter, in which we're looking at the intersection of public health and public land. I'd like to thank our sponsors, National Park Service and All Trails. I am, as you can see, currently broadcasting from the very summit of the Grand Teton in Grand Teton National Park. You can use your All Trails app to get there. Just put in Lower Saddle via Garnet Canyon. When you get to Lower Saddle, hang a right, go up about 2,000 or 3,000 feet, and I'll see you up here. All Trails has been a fantastic sponsor, fantastic supporter, and they offer the largest curated collection of trails available online. So we do hope that you're able to avail yourself of their app and of our national parks as well. The webinar series has this chapter followed by one last one in the lead up to this year's SHIP. So land management runs through August, and then we've got the outdoor recreation chapter to finish up. This year's SHIP will be focused on equity, access, and the mental health benefits of time outside. It will be broadcast again virtually from Jackson, Wyoming, October 14th to the 16th. So we do hope that you'll be able to join us for that. So today's webinar episode is on park prescriptions. And as you're probably familiar, the practice of prescribing time in our parks and on our trails has been growing as the evidence for health benefits of time outside continues to grow. The opportunities and challenges that stand before the park prescription movement are coming into sharper focus. What patterns in the research are emerging? How can prescriptions be fulfilled, particularly in vulnerable communities where they would do the most good? And how do we institutionalize nature as medicine within policy at the community, municipal, state, and national levels? And so joining us today and helping us to address some of these questions and answer them from the perspective of their own experiences are three distinguished guests. We have Atiya Wells, Dr. Kathleen Wolf, Dr. Robert Zarr. Atiya is coming to us from Baltimore, Maryland. She is the founder and CEO of Backyard Base Camp, as well as of Bliss Meadows. She's also a pediatric nurse with a passion to introduce, educate, and connect families in Baltimore, especially those of color, to local outdoor spaces. Thank you for joining us, Tia. We also have Dr. Kathleen Wolf. She's a research social scientist at the College of the Environment, University of Washington. Dr. Wolf's research explores the human dimensions of urban ecosystems, and in the past decade has focused on human health response to nature context. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Wolf. And Dr. Robert Zarr is a board-certified pediatrician at Unity Healthcare, located in Washington, D.C., where he cares for low-income and immigrant populations. He's the founder and medical director of ParkRx America, a community health initiative to prescribe nature to patients and families to prevent and treat chronic disease and promote wellness. So thank you, Dr. Zarr, for joining us as well. And for all of you who are joining us, this presentation is being recorded for later distribution via our Slack channel at Shift Nature Health and on our YouTube channel. So we'll have a moderated conversation for about the first 30 minutes, but then we really want to bring in questions from you, our audience. So use the Q&A session, not the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and enter in the questions that you've got for the panelists. And we'll get to them as soon as we can when we're finished with the moderated conversation. So thank you all for joining us here today. And I'm going to start out with a question for you, Dr. Wolf. You've been doing so much of the research on the health benefits of time outside, and I was hoping that you could speak to the pattern of findings that are emerging in the research that you're looking at as it relates to nature and public health.
First of all, Christian, thank you for this invitation to be here. And hello to everyone introducing themselves on the chat. It's wonderful to see the representation, different people doing different things, different parts of the country. Wonderful. Hello to all. As a scientist, I have these conversations on occasion with students, and we talk about what is science. And for many of them, it is about a topic. It's about, oh, I study trees, or I study animals, or I study soils. For me, science is about pattern. It's about understanding all of that that swirls around us and finding meaning within that. And so that's what I want to share with you in just a few minutes here today, is one person's interpretation of the current science and research about nature and health, and with a focus on urbanized settings. And so what are the patterns that I observe? And what I'll say is, I'm not talking only about my research. I'm talking about work that has been done for decades. It numbers in the thousands of articles, and we are seeing a remarkable surge in the productivity of this science all around the world. And so it gives us much to think about and to act on. So let me start by what is kind of a large-scale pattern. What I observe is that nature provides protective means or processes for our health, and it also provides therapeutic or treatment opportunities. And these are a little different. There's overlap, of course, but they're a little different. So for protective, that means kind of the holistic outlook of what is it that maintains our wellness and our well-being. And that can be physical health, mental health, social cohesion, and social connections, which are also deemed to be important to our health. As I talk about this, I'm going to focus on mental health because, again, in the limited amount of time I have, just to provide some examples of these two broad categories, the protective and the treatment sort of dimensions of nature and health. So as a protective element, having green in our nearby environment, and some organizations are now promoting a 10-minute walk as an example. Having green in our nearby environment enables physical activity. It gives us the opportunity, it gives us the places to go out and be active. And what does that do? Well, it can protect us from a variety of chronic diseases, particularly for people like myself who are a little older. But we're seeing ever more expression of chronic disease in children. And so all across all ages, and frankly, from the research literature, across many cultural and ethnic groups, having opportunities for physical activity in nature is valuable. And in terms of mental health, it's not only the activity, but it appears that this contact with nature helps ease stress, it helps ease anxiety, it contributes to mindfulness, which are all beneficial for mental health, particularly now in this time of COVID. On the treatment or therapy side with regard to mental health, we're seeing studies that show routine, very short, that's another thing here, very short experiences, 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half. The weekend away, far away from home, special place, wonderful. I do that myself. But nearby, routine experience with nature, good for protective and wellness elements. Depression reduction. So there's studies showing that brief amounts of time, particularly walking outdoors, can help us reduce depression. And part of the nature and health is, what are the mechanisms? Well, rumination is one of those. A colleague of mine here at the University of Washington, Greg Bratman, has determined that people who are more prone to depression and anxiety tend to have more negative sort of negative thought spirals. And being in nature and observing what's around us can help us to kind of pull back from that, and in that way ease depression and other mental health concerns. So that was a very broad overview, protective aspects of mental health, also therapy. What's coming along? I continue to monitor the research literature. Again, not just my own, but what's going on in the community of science around the world. And it is astounding what's happening. We are learning more about specific beneficiaries. So where the earliest studies were sort of this broad, all people, now we're understanding different times of the life course, from children to adolescents to adults to older people. What might be the differences in the nature encounters that we need or respond to? Another aspect that we're seeing is dosage. So again, rather than general, hey, go out and be in nature, we're starting to understand the specifics, time, the kind of nature, the value. For instance, in terms of mental health, there are a few studies suggesting that biodiversity, encountering places that have a higher biological complexity, greater biodiversity, may be of greater benefit for mental health than more simplistic, very formal landscapes. So another thing is, where is this work coming from? China. Oh my gosh, what's coming along in China because of their campaign to urbanization. They seem to be investing in greater understanding of the importance of green spaces. So we're seeing contributions of this science from all over the world. And even though it's done in other nations or other communities, it can have relevance by way of the research design for our own circumstances and our own places. The last trend I'm seeing, or the last pattern I'm seeing, is that this is becoming actionable. So when I started doing this work, and my colleagues, the comments we would get when we would report a study would be, isn't that interesting? Sort of a reaction of curiosity or novelty. Now we're hearing about this, we understand this, and organizations, people, government agencies are starting to act on this and put in place programs. Yes, we can learn more from research, more about dosage, more about equity, more about the particular circumstances of various cultural or ethnic groups with regard to nature experiences in their communities. We can learn more, and as a scientist, that's what I'm always trying to do. But we have enough now to be actionable, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Robert and Atiya with regard to that, because they're working at different scales. That's what I'm seeing. It's actionable, happening at a city scale, a state scale. It's also happening within neighborhoods where people are taking up this information or using it to support their activity that they're doing for other motivations to aid their communities, and inserting the health message within that. So patterns, protective nature, treatment nature, more about dosage, more about understanding the individual or specific circumstances of our nature encounters, and now it's actionable. We know enough, we understand enough to start making differences in our communities. And by the way, I'll suggest that if you are doing programs in your community, find a researcher and partner to do that sort of evaluation and ongoing research assessment. So helpful, those sort of collaborative partnerships.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that overview. That's great. I took some notes for future reference on this as well. Dr. Zarr, what can you tell us about what Dr. Wolf just described and its relevance to your patients and their care?
Well, thanks again for inviting me to participate on this panel, Christian. And Kathy, I just wanted to say I really enjoy listening to what you have to say. And just a quick aside before I dive in a little bit, just so everybody is aware that Kathy and I, along with two other close colleagues, are putting the finishing touches on a continuing education unit that was funded by the U.S. Forest Service. So we hope to be actually addressing many of these questions on our 1 hour taped seminar. It'll be available through Parker X America's website, and there'll be credit that's available for doctors for CME credit through the American Public Health Association. So for those who want to tune in later, we'll have that available for you as well. Listening, I've been, also taking notes frantically as Kathy is talking, and the kinds of things that she just mentioned in terms of both prevention and treatment is what I see on a daily basis. I've been practicing general pediatrics for more than 20 years now. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and that's where I started something called DC ParkRx, which is evolved into a national nonprofit called ParkRx America. And I take what Kathy says very seriously. I have committed a lot of my time and effort to finding ways to take this evidence, to take this science and translate it into something that we as healthcare workers can use in the office. And in just speaking and meeting with Atiya earlier and listening to her and the language that she's using, and she will, of course, use later on after I'm done with my preamble here. What I have found in my experience with DC ParkRx and now ParkRx America is that it's all about how we implement, how we translate this science into practice. I think there's a really common misconception that, that we doctors are going to tell you patients where to go and what to do and how long to do it. And there has been this stereotype and this unfortunate practice for decades, if not centuries and millennia, of physicians really telling you what you should be doing. And I have taken a different perspective on this in the sense that I really see this as an opportunity for us as physicians or healthcare workers to develop a relationship with our patient in a way that's different than what many of us were trained to do. And I think that rather than telling people what they need and where they need to go, I think one of the most important things is asking the right questions. And this gets back to the conversation that I was having earlier with Atiya, is that it's really important to find out where people are. And, in my setting, I work at a community health center. I am in a setting that is largely low income, people of color, lots of immigrants, and their environments, so to speak, have a lot of challenges for them. And it's important for me to ask the question, where is it that you feel safe and comfortable? It's a pretty loaded question, but it has to be asked. And I usually, I put that sort of, parenthetical clause, that pause in there. And then I say, and what I mean is outside, and then I throw in some of Kathy's science there because there's a lot of science out there, and it's not just Kathy. There's dozens and dozens of scientists around the world who are publishing studies. I happen to be one of them too now. I've got this NIH-funded study, and we're looking at nature prescriptions through a randomized controlled trial at Unity Healthcare. We're partnering with Kaiser. So I'm joining the ranks. I'm a little late in joining you, Kathy, but I'm trying to catch up. But my point is that, it's this conversation that you have to start with your patient. Do I do it in that doctor style? Yeah, I do. I mean, I do think that the prescription needs to have some structure. And that's something that we've been working on for years and feel like we've come to a place that really, I think, embodies a standard universal prescription that can be used anywhere. I had the luxury of traveling around the world for 9 months and had the opportunity to meet with physicians around the world, with nurses, with physical therapists, occupational therapists, land managers. And what I find is that the narrative is very similar. There's racism everywhere. There's people of color everywhere. There's barriers and challenges all over the world. It's not just here in the US. And there's also challenges in the clinical setting of how to take this evidence, this body of science that really links the benefits between spending time in nature and improved health outcomes and putting it into practice. So I'm very proud to say, I think we've come up finally with a platform. We call it a nature prescribing platform that takes this idea of a prescription, which is an ancient idea, really. And it says, look, there's 4 parts to it. There's a place, there's an activity, there's a dose, and there's a frequency. And you kind of need to have those 4 elements for it to be a prescription. Now, how you do that, that's the art of medicine. I don't teach that. That's something that we as individuals have to become comfortable with in our own fields. But what I do is I provide that structure, and I also provide a way in which we can begin to understand how it is that we start these conversations with our patients, with their families, to figure out what's likely, what's possible, what's comfortable, what's safe, what's likely to happen, and what's likely to return back into some sort of outcome that is recognized both by the patient and by me. So the things that Kathy just mentioned, the depression, the hypertension, the diabetes, the mental health, I'm looking to see measurable changes in those areas. But I'm also looking to hear about that experience my patient has. I want to know what they felt and what they experienced when they went outside in that space of theirs. And I think I'm going to turn it on over to Atiya, because I would really like to hear what it's like on the receiving end, because oftentimes our patients don't feel very comfortable. They don't feel very welcome. In fact, they feel very scared and very threatened when they go outdoors. And that is a common experience for millions of Americans. I'll stop there, and I'd love to hear what Atiya has to say. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Zarr. And Atiya, you're coming to us from Baltimore today, and you've got such a great, the work that you've been doing has been so inspiring with Traverse with the Nurse, for example, and Backyard Base Camp and Bliss Meadows. And I'm just wondering what can you tell us about your neighborhood in particular in Baltimore, and why you started Bliss Meadows and how it connects with research as well as with park prescriptions.
Sure. So yes, I am in Baltimore City. I live in the largest neighborhood in Baltimore City, also the most invisible. A lot of people who actually have been born and raised in Baltimore don't even know my neighborhood exists, which is strange because, like I said, it's the largest. We have over 23,000 residents here. We have literally 1 grocery store. We do have a lot of housing complexes here because the IRC resettles a lot of immigrants and refugees here. And so our population is largely made up of Black and brown people. And so, you know, I was not an outdoorsy person growing up. I kind of fell into Nature Connection about 3 to 4 years ago. And, you know, I noticed the racial disparities as I would attend conferences and workshops and classes. And, you know, I often wondered, like, why are there no Black people here? And so I had to do a lot of learning, unlearning, relearning about, you know, the history of Black and brown folks being outdoors through the entire history of America. And through that, you know, I've learned that folks of color, we need that safe container. We need that sense of safety when we want to go outdoors. And what that looks like is being among folks who look like us, seeing people who look like us outdoors, people who talk like us. And that is how you you get that sense of safety. And so our neighborhood doesn't have any real green space. We have like a ball field, but it's not, you know, a community park where people kind of go to have picnics or spend time and do the barbecue thing. So, you know, when people talk to me about, you know, getting these prescriptions to go out and, you know, get in touch with nature or whatever, first of all, they're not likely to be folks who consider themselves outdoorsy. They don't know where to go. And when they go somewhere, they don't really know what to do when they're out there. And so part of my job, or what I've made my job as a pediatric nurse and a nature educator, is to really receive these people in local green spaces. And like I said, I'm in Baltimore City, so we have a lot of vacant lots. And part of the reason why I named my organization Backyard Base Camp is because I really want people to become aware and get connected with the things that are around us in this urban environment. There is a narrative of escapism that gets fed to a lot of Black and brown people that's like, there's nothing good in your neighborhood, so you should go somewhere else to experience nature. You should go to Yellowstone. You should go to the Grand Tetons. You should go maybe to the next neighborhood over because they're more affluent. So they have like a cleaner park. And so I really engage folks with what's in your backyard. If you don't have a backyard, what plants do you see growing in the sidewalks? What are the patterns that you recognize? When you're on your way to the bus stop, what birds are you seeing? What color are they? What do they look like? What do they sound like? So really bringing people's awareness into our urban environment, which is something that we do anyway, but we don't really notice it, not really as far as connecting with nature, but being mindful of who is around us and getting that sense of safety. So really opening up the awareness is kind of what I do. And so I started the Bliss Meadows project because, like I said, we don't have any green space, and I was tired of shipping my kids up or packing them up in the car and driving 25 minutes to a park for us to go on a hike. And so I started looking in our neighborhood for some accessible green space, and I found a park around the corner. It's funny that Dr. Wolf actually mentioned the 10 minute to a park initiative. One of our former mayors, we've had so many, I can't keep count, recently signed on that 10 minute walk to a park initiative. And so we are within 10 minutes to a park, but the question that has never been asked is, what does that park even look like? Is it accessible? Can you even get in there? And so the park that's in our neighborhood, you can't. It's just an overgrown woody lot. And so I rallied some of the community members together, and we've been working on creating some nature trails inside of those woods. It's a 7-acre park, which is small enough for you to feel like you're kind of in the woods, but it's big enough for you to also get that feeling that you're not in the city anymore. And then we have a 2.5-acre meadow that's in front of that, that we have started an urban farm on because, like I said, we only have one grocery store in this neighborhood. A part of that food desert / food apartheid movement, because systemically and institutionally it's designed for Black and brown communities not to have access to these things. Barriers have been put in place for us not to excel, so to speak. So, so the Bliss Meadows project is a 10-acre land reclamation project that encompasses that 7-acre park, a 2.5-acre vacant lot that we're working with. And then last year we worked to purchase a vacant house that sits next door to that vacant lot. So we can have some indoor space to create workshops and classes to really engage with folks in the community about connecting with nature. Throughout my work, I've realized that, not everyone is ready to jump into the woods. Not everybody's ready to go on a hike, but most folks have gardened before or they planted a seed before. And so we really try to meet folks where they are. And if that's engaging them in a vacant lot or an open field first before we go into a deep nature connection woodsy hike, then that's just what we'll do.
Thank you. I'm always so impressed with your work, Tia. And I think, one of the things that is so interesting about Atiya's work is that it's really a sort of a one-woman band and one-woman effort that's so remarkable about it. But we've got a citizen-led initiative to create green space in vulnerable communities where the health benefits of nature are most needed and yet least accessible. And what I'm so curious about is how do we go from that anomaly to making that the norm? I'm wondering if you have any insights about how we could institutionalize this.
Yeah, so I've been working in Baltimore on an initiative sort of similar to that. It's through the city's Connecting Children to Nature grant project. So Baltimore received a grant to really look at the agency level, what does our green space look like and how we can use the research that says green space is good for mental health benefits, and like how we can create equitable access to nature, because we don't have any. And if you know anything about Baltimore, it's a very segregated city. We have what we call the white L, which is where all the affluent white people live, and the black butterfly, which is where most of the Black and brown communities are. And so most of the green space and the larger parks are within the white L. And so we get like the ball fields and like the playground parks in the black butterfly. And what the city is looking at is interagency wise, as far as, with Parks and Rec, with our Office of Sustainability, with the mayor's office, with Department of Public Works, like getting all these agencies into the room together to talk about the policies of green space and how we can use them within the communities, and looking at the parks that we currently have and how much space they have, looking at some of the school grounds and if we can use some of the schools as community green space when schools are not in session. And so that has been an initiative that we've been working on for the past year and a half or so. And what we've really focused on is the neighborhoods that have the most violence, what their access to green space is like, and if they don't have any, how we can get them there. Looking at all the vacant lots that we have, can we create a park out of a vacant lot or a run of vacant lots?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dr. Zarr, when we were talking earlier this month, you were mentioning the missing link between the prescriptions and the fulfillment in vulnerable communities. And I'm curious what you're hearing from Tia that might inform the way that you're prescribing or the development of the park prescription movement moving forward.
Well, clearly the work that Atiya has done is phenomenal, and I think she has a good grasp and a good foundation of what needs to be done in our own community, and frankly, how that might be translated across many communities. And what's the question is, where is the missing link? I'd like to sort of switch gears just a little bit, because it's important. I think it's really important for us to, to know the research, to know the resources out there. Absolutely. I'm a big, advocate of knowledge. You need to know the science that supports what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and you need to know what's out there that makes that possible. But at the end of the day, and I'm speaking, for healthcare workers, all right? Those of us who are right in there in that exam room, trying to make a difference in every patient's life in 10, 15 minutes span of time. So, the question really becomes, what can we do, during this very limited exposure that we have? And sometimes it's, 15 minutes per year. If we're lucky, it's 15 minutes every 3 months. And I mean, really lucky to have that kind of time with families. They have other obligations. They have other things they have to do. They can't be coming to the clinic that often for many of them. They have to work, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs. So, I think that, the missing link for many of these communities is what Atiya is talking about. And it has to do with the allocation of resources. And Kathy may speak to that as well. There are a number of studies that have looked at the resource allocation and the richness of nature in some neighborhoods and the near absence of it in others. And that's challenging because, I once in a while, I run into this barrier of there's no way I can't go outside. It's been intensified a bit more during COVID. And, I live in a relatively affluent neighborhood. My patients live in a relatively not affluent neighborhood. So I see this stark difference between people who have a backyard, people who have a front yard, people who have, parks that are 1 block away, people who have rooftops, gardens, people who have gardens, that are so accessible. They have trees that are near them. And then I've got my patients, who have, if they're lucky, a window, and then even luckier, a window that looks out onto something besides a parking lot. Living in overcrowded housing, poor housing conditions, violence, lots of fear, lots of mistrust or lack of trust between them and the police in their communities. And that extends to the park police. That extends to the individuals who should be providing a safe place for all of us. So if you ask me what the missing link is, it's a big missing link. We're talking about structural racism. We're talking about centuries of this country is founded on these principles of separation and inequality. And so I realize I can't change that in the office in 15 minutes. And if I'm lucky, you know, every 3 months. But this is why I mentioned earlier is, you know, we doctors or occupational therapists or whoever you are out there listening, if you're a healthcare worker, you know what I'm talking about. We are trying to get something done in that room. They can't wait to clone Atiyas across the country. We can't wait for the policy change. We have to do something right now. And so that's why it's important to ask people, you know, could there possibly be a place you could go to now? And it might be looking out your window. It might be, you know, meditation. You know, we could jump into a conversation about nature and ask ourselves, you know, are humans natural? Well, the answer clearly is yes. So sometimes, you know, looking inward for the answers and for the experience is all my patients have, you know. So, you know, this conversation is a very difficult one because we have reality and then we have the science, which, you know, looks at ways in which we can change reality for the better. And then we have examples in the community with Atiya of examples of how it could be better. And I'm stuck right in the middle of all of this. To be honest with you, healthcare workers are wondering what we can do in that span of time, which is what inspired me to do something and not keep waiting and waiting and waiting. Kathy pointed out, there's enough research to do something now, to do actionable items. Atiya is pointing out that people in communities that have been living these wretched conditions for centuries can do something now. We don't have to wait for perfect. Get something done now. So that would be my response to where's the missing link.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Wolf, I'm wondering if you can follow up on that with what you're seeing in the patterns in the research as they relate to urban nature that might incentivize investments that could be made to address the missing link that Dr. Zarr is referring to.
Well, let's see. That's a rather specific question. So I'm going to back up just a little bit from that. And what I'm sensing here in this session is Robert has that intimate doctor to patient relationship, brief times, intermittently. Atiya, also a healthcare provider, but also working passionately within her community, so a little larger scale. Me, little later career, what am I doing now? I'm still doing research, but because I kind of monitor, you know, these patterns, I'm trying now to take that to policy. And so I never expected it, but I'm kind of becoming a policy wonk. What I'm trying to do is to compel city level, county level, maybe even state, federal, I can't even go there, but the more regional government, I'm trying to compel them, they, organizations, agencies to take the nature and health evidence seriously and move it to policy. So I'm so excited to hear about what's happening, Atiya in Baltimore, but let's think about that another level. What Atiya described, and again, this is a very brief session, so I may not understand all the nuance, but this often happens in communities where they sort of take stock of, well, what do we have now? Existing parks, existing natural areas, schoolyards, and so on. What I'm trying to propel is a more comprehensive outlook within urban planning for green space provision. The American Planning Association in a short while will release their first ever research agenda. It's called Future Shape. And a group of people from across the country were mobilized to inform the Future Shape process. And I was invited to contribute about environment and health. What I came to learn in the midst of all these folks, very smart, very accomplished people, transportation systems, housing systems, utility systems, waste management systems. We have not yet thought about greening in our communities as a system. We continue to think about it as isolated, opportunistic spaces. And as Robert pointed out, Atiya is working to address structural racism has influenced the location and quality and character of those spaces. In addition to that, I believe there's been not intentional, but kind of a sense of neglect with regard to green space and city generally, because up until recently with the nature and health evidence and ecosystem services, green space was, oh, isn't that nice? Aren't parks nice to have? Aren't they pretty? They were not seen as essential. They were not seen as an important system within a quality, functioning urban environment. And so, again, Robert is working in that space of that intimate connection to patients, families, households. Atiya is working within that realm as well, but also this community level of recognizing the potential green resource and how to better suit it or to adjust it to the people who live nearby. But take that up another level, the level of how urban planning is done. That's where my interest lies now, and taking the evidence, the patterns of evidence to that. So return to that question about incentivize. If we adopt this broader systems view, how do we incentivize and regulate other systems in our cities? I think we can start to infuse that where there's the combination of bottoms up, grassroots, ever greater understanding of the importance of the community dynamic in urban planning, but likewise broader structural systems that enable and mobilize resources to get these things done. So I really can't speak about the specifics of incentivize, though another aspect of this that I'm interested in and learning about, really steep learning curve right now, is we often are told or observe that with greening improvements, new gardens, new parks, more trees, there can be gentrification and displacement. So how do we address that in this idea of a broader system of greening in our cities? And there's some people who are doing some really interesting work, not only to identify the disparities of distribution of the parks and trees, but to say, if we acknowledge those disparities and the historic reasons for them and move to enable more greening, how do we do so in a way that doesn't displace the very people who are supposed to benefit from this greening? I was once at an event in Atlanta, and there was a lot of discussion about structural racism and the provision of greening in that city, conversation that's not unusual in many cities. And one woman in a neighborhood where she had seen this happen around the Beltline said, "Why am I paying taxes to pay for something that's going to displace me?" That was a heads up for me. So as part of this broader system of urban planning, green systems within, acknowledging the potential for displacement, people are trying to figure out how to incentivize enhancements, nature enhancements in communities, but without the unexpected consequences or the negative consequences that can be that can unfold, not by intention, but we're seeing enough of this pattern as well across cities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wolf. And we do want to start pulling in some questions from the audience here. And I've got one from Jordan Larson that ties into something that I wanted to talk to you about, Tia. And Jordan asks, what measurable changes are clinicians most interested or concerned about? They say, I've seen blood pressure, heart rate, cortisol levels, and self-completed questionnaires. But what Jordan wants to know is what you feel clinicians would be most interested in. And Tia, I'm just curious, what are you seeing in terms of your community member responses? You're a nurse. So what are the practical responses that you're seeing as your community members interact with Bliss Meadows?
That's a really good question, because we actually, like, even though I'm a nurse, I don't really look at our community's kind of like health, their health outcomes. Kind of like, I don't measure their blood pressure, I don't measure their heart rate, is basically what I'm trying to say. What I am really interested in is more of the qualitative effects of what we're doing. So what I've been noticing as we've been working with the Bliss Meadows Project for the past year and giving folks access to fresh produce and fresh food and having people like come out to the farm and like engage with us is that our neighbors have been talking to each other. So like, I don't know if you've, well, you may have noticed this like in a neighborhood, like you've lived in a neighborhood for however many years, but like you don't know your neighbors. You may say hi and that's about it. You go on about your day. That's real for most people, and that has been real for our community. But lately, and this may be also effects of COVID, as we've been hosting our weekly food distributions on Thursday, we give a box of produce to everyone who lives around the farm. You know, we get to engage with them. They get to engage with each other. We talk about recipes. We talk about, you know, like what's in the box, what can we cook? This is what I made last week. You should try this. And hey girl, how you doing? And like, hi to kids. I saw them run up and down the street. Where's such and such? And it's just been like really beautiful to see the community coming together. And that's not something that I've seen in the 6 years that I've lived here. So really like being able to see that. And that is also an effect on, you know, mental health, because you don't feel so alone. You know that somebody's watching out for you just by like the questions that they ask, like, where's your daughter? Where's your son? What happened to your dog? What happened to your car? Just like really engaging with folks on that level. So I'm not sure that what we do can kind of translate to what the clinicians are wanting to see, but I definitely see a difference in, you know, how our neighbors interact with each other.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Wolf, can you speak to any of the research on nature contact and social isolation and loneliness that's relevant to society at large, but in particular this moment of COVID?
Yeah, briefly, loneliness within the research on health generally, not just nature and health, but health generally, has revealed that loneliness is a social determinant of health, or an unsocial determinant of health, in that people who are lonely, socially isolated, recover from surgery less quickly, are more prone to other morbidities or illnesses. And we're seeing also with climate and urban heat effects, you know, now with the heat events going on across the country, people who are lonely may be more likely, because they can't reach out to others, they can't let people know if the air conditioning is not working or whatever, they may be more susceptible to mortality. And I mean, this issue of loneliness and health has become so prominent that in the UK, in England, several years ago, they created a ministry or minister of loneliness to address public health and loneliness within their National Health Service. So how does nature address that? And, you know, Atiya just, she described it much better than I can. We see that by way of nature enables informal encounters, that helps. If there's stewardship, if people come together to care for a place, a garden, a park, that builds in more social connection, social cohesion. And then again, elevating this a little bit, some colleagues in the Forest Service, Lindsay Campbell and Erica Svensson, have done some remarkable research showing that those communities those communities that have this nature interaction dynamic tend to be more resilient in the face of major disasters. So Hurricane Katrina studies, they revealed that people who were working together for the sake of a local resource, such as a park, were the first responders, truly the first responders, because they were there, they were mobilized, they knew each other's talents and abilities. And so again, there's various scales of how this plays out, but loneliness, social cohesion, certainly connected to human health.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to some other questions here. We've got one from America Whitehall. And America asked, how do I effectively build and support a case that I can take to medical professionals and health organizations in my community if I want to build a Park RX partnership? That's for you, Dr. Zarr.
Well, I think that, understanding, having some insight into the lives of healthcare workers is certainly an important aspect of this. It's not that, we healthcare workers are, oblivious to the social determinants of health or to the common sense connections between nature and human health. I mean, I think we would be remiss in thinking for a second that we don't even think about these issues. We may not know the science the way that Dr. Wolf does, but we do have some sense that this is the right thing to do. And for those of us who work in underserved communities and see the challenges in the families we serve every day, we see right in our face every day, we hear the stories. And we have a pretty good idea of what the challenges are. So I think understanding that perspective is probably the single most important thing. And for people like Atiya to get into these health centers. I mean, these are health centers. Okay, across the country, we're serving upwards of 20-something million Americans. These are largely low income in the dense urban areas, largely people of color. These are vulnerable populations, and they come see us for a variety of reasons, for well care, for preventive care, for acute care, you name it. And these are all opportunities to tap into. And I think maybe a strategy is to tagging along what Kathy said is maybe starting with the National Association for Community Health Centers, going up there to the top and saying, look, here's a trade association that is there to lobby for the community health centers and the communities they serve. They have a conference twice a year. These would be great opportunities for people who have programs or have policy ideas or have science to share that with those at that level. So that's what I would say. I think certainly there are a lot of organizations out there that provide some insight into what it's like for those of us who are advocating very strongly to implement these kinds of programs or these kinds of prescription, nature prescriptions in our practice. And Parker X America is certainly one of them. But making those kinds of connections would be very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. We've got one from Lucy Gomez Feliciano. Do you know if nature as medicine is being talked about with future doctors in medical school?
Is that for Kathy or me or Atiya? I'm sorry.
Who's experienced it? I know Dr. Morgan Green, who directs our Emerging Leaders program, was a protege of Dr. Nushin Razani and integrated nature into the curriculum at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital. Are you familiar with other places where it's been taking place?
Well, I would venture to say, go ahead, Kathy, if you have something, go ahead.
Really quick comment. I've had that question a number of times. I'm often invited to do public talks at professional or trade meetings, and I get that question often. And then I ask younger doctors, and they often, they come to nature and health after they finish their physician training. And I'll just say, as an academic, to move something like this into a curriculum, oh my gosh. So I think that's part of the motivation why Robert and our colleagues have put together this training seminar that is not yet ready, but will be soon, to reach doctors who have an interest. And maybe that's the baby step then, to see something happening in a more systemic way in medical training.
Tia, I just have to ask, so if, let's say you're in Bliss Meadows one day and somebody comes to you and they've been prescribed time outdoors, where would you direct them to get the most benefit? Let's say they're suffering from stress from COVID and racial violence and how would you fulfill that prescription?
So there would be a few like key questions I would need to ask first. First, I would ask them where they actually live, because we know that, you know, daily contact points, if you think about the nature connection pyramid, there's daily, weekly, monthly, yearly trips that you can take. So I would want to know where that person lives, because Bliss Meadows might not be the most convenient place for them to experience nature or to engage with nature like that. And if you know, and if that's the case, then we would have to look at, you know, pull up their house on Google Maps like I did and figure out what's close to them and where they can go. And we may find some things that they didn't even know were there. So like in our neighborhood, we don't have parks, but we have a lot of raw land or vacant lots, if you will, that just have never been developed. So they are these little teeny tiny patches of woods that exist. So it may not be a park, so to speak, but it's like some natural space that they can get to. And then I would want to know, like, what are their fears? Like, what are their edges? So I don't want to, you know, throw them into something that they're not ready for. And so, you know, if they're like, well, I don't really like walking through tall grasses. Okay, well, then I won't lead you through the meadow because there's nothing but tall grasses back there. And I like to start with, what do you know about nature? Because, or like, what do you know about the natural world actually? Because like, there's a lot of fear. Like I found when I was working with a lot of public school teachers and daycare providers, working with them to infuse nature into their curriculums, they had fears about being outside that made absolutely no sense. So they were thinking that like we had lions and tigers and bears in the woods in Baltimore City. And I'm like, that's actually not true. And to really like, because, and I think that is perpetuated by like, you know, National Geographic and Animal Planet, because they show you like the sexy nature things, like the lions and tigers and bears. And so you get this notion that they're everywhere, but you don't really think about where they actually live. So like having an urban ecology 101, like, okay, this is what you're actually likely to find. These are the hazards in our area. And like making them aware of what they're likely to find in, you know, in our urban space. So it would be a conversation first before it would be a going to of a place. And then, you know, we're fortunate to have 2 ponds on the property of Bliss Meadows. So I would probably have them do a sit spot by the pond because it's such a beautiful, peaceful, and serene place, and you kind of forget that you are really in the city until you hear the sirens and the helicopters, and then and then you're brought back.
Well, I want to just thank the 3 of you for taking an hour out of your day and partaking in this conversation with us, and also folks from the audience. We do have additional questions. We're not going to have time for them, but we do bring them onto our Slack channel, which we hope that you will join. You can see that at Shift Nature Health on Slack. Dr. Zarr, Dr. Wolf, Tia, thank you for enriching this conversation and our understanding of the park prescription movement, some of the challenges and opportunities that stand before it. We're really appreciative of you taking this time today. This recording will be broadcast on our YouTube channel, and we do share it on Figshare as well for those in the research community. We also are bringing those questions that are unanswered, as I said, to Slack at Shift Nature Health. So the upcoming webinars I'd like to bring to your attention, we've got one coming up on July 28th. It's on the Trails Calculator, a project we've been incubating since last year's Shift. That is designing an open source tool that allows for the quantification of the averted medical costs of trails, which in turn allows people to argue for greater investments in trails wherever they might be. And then we have another one on August 11th with Ralph Buckley, who at Griffith University was the lead author on the paper that quantified the mental health benefits of parks at $6 trillion globally. And he'll be joined by John Jarvis, who was the director of the National Park Service from 2009 to 2013, and Brenda Schmidt, currently CEO of Coplex. Before that was the founder of Solera Health. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for those. And we hope, of course, that you'll be able to join us for SHIP, October 14th to the 16th, which is looking at equity, access, and the mental health benefits of time outside. It will be virtual this year. We hope that you're able to join us. Sign up for our newsletter if you've not done so already. And thank you very much for taking time out of your busy days to join us for today's conversation. Stay safe out there.